All right, morning everyone. We're expecting quite a few more people, but we'll get cracking because I've always found that even 90 minutes isn't a lot of time to get through, I guess, all the stuff we want to get through and all the questions. My name's James Smith from the Crafty Pint. I've been running these sessions with the team at Crafty Malt and Good Beer Week for, I think, 6 years now, with a few interstate as well. We've amassed a panel of a very impressive talent from across the industry. Because there's so many, I'll do the introductions rather than getting them to do the other, because we want to get through some other stuff as well. Starting with the far end, we have Ben Carwyn, who's the founder of Carwyn Cellars. Started out as a bottle shop in Thornbury, moved up the road, and now is regarded as one of the very best bars and bottle shops in Australia. They're currently showcasing all American beers for Pint of Origin. If you want to go up there and try some pretty amazing stuff, you'll have them on till Sunday. Yeah. Dan Hall is one of the founders of Tallboy and Moose, a brew pub in Preston. Prior to that, he was working at Hawker's. Prior to that, you had a little, really tiny brewing operation called We Make Beer. And so it had Tallboy and Moose now, going 6 years. How long have you been going? 5 years, yeah. Then we have Jessie Jungalwalla, who is the founder of brand design agency Craft Instinct. Does all my graphic design, but also works with a whole bunch of breweries and small distilleries, a couple of wine labels as well. On, I guess, not just design work, but a range of other stuff around sort of branding and promotion. And we have Richard Watkins, who I believe likes to claim he's been the longest on the tools of any brewer in Australia. We worked out 25 and a half years he's been brewing beer, starting out at the Wigan Pen in Canberra, which was a tiny brew pub operation and was making beers well ahead of its time for years. Founded BentSpoke 6 years ago, won another trophy last night for their Sprocket IPA, which Mazen's beer previously held, so we can set them off against each other later. So BentSpoke operate a brew pub in Braddon in Canberra and also a large production facility in Mitchell called the Cannery. Another of his IPAs is the reigning Gab's Hottest 100 #1 beer as well. Can make good beer, essentially. He is very popular. Is that why his IPA won over yours? And then we have Zoe Ottaway, who's been involved in, I guess, various marketing roles throughout the beer industry. I first met her when she was with Lion. Since worked for Mountain Goat, started a marketing agency, now working at Brick Lane. Was the host of the AIBA video last night with all the judges. Bit of an all-round superstar. Mazen Hajjar was the founder of the first ever microbrewery in the Middle East. When did you found 961? 2006. While the bombs were falling, decided to start his own brewery in Beirut. Moved over here 6 and a bit years ago. Yeah, and launched Hawker's, which has grown into one of the biggest independent breweries in Australia. Yeah, I guess it contacts all over the world. He's always got, name dropping, bringing famous brewers from around the world into his brewery. So he's basically got a real sort of global perspective on the beer world. And then John Burridge, who's seen how bad I am at golf more than anyone else, from Malt and Yakima Chief Hops. When I first met you were sales for Moo Brew, and then moved into the supply and sort of distribution side. So yeah, covering a lot of different skills in the beer industry. So we've got some topics we'll talk about. If you have any questions you want to ask, feel free to put your hand up at any time. We've got a list of topics here. We don't tend to always stick to them. What we tend to start with, though, is the challenges facing brewery startups today. I guess it's a pretty busy market, and also it's a pretty weird time, and we'll touch upon, I guess, the impact of COVID in a bit. But I guess maybe Dan, having been, I guess, one of the smaller operations here, what are your thoughts on the challenges facing smaller breweries or people getting into the industry today? We need to share the mics. Keep the mic high as well.
I guess one of the biggest challenges at the moment is we're a really busy marketplace, and so finding shelf space is challenging. When we first started, we were a keg-only brewery, and last year especially just meant that we just couldn't do that. We had to pivot everything into package, and so starting a brewery means that you need to have that in your portfolio, in your range, and so yeah.
Do you still think you need to have that now? Can you go back to be more keg driven, or is the market demanding package like cans from everybody?
I think the market is definitely telling us that we, and our sort of business advisors as well are saying that you need to have those as many different revenue streams in your wheelhouse as possible, because you just don't know what the future's going to hold. And so yeah, that's kind of the direction that we've had to take to make sure that we have more resilience going forward. So I would suggest anyone who's starting now needs to look at other revenue streams, not just keg or package. There needs to be a bit more variety in those outlets. So,
Rich, we've spoken in the past. You've always said for years there's only two models that work. There's the kind of the brew pub taproom model, or being big production, or these days I guess both. Is that something that you think still stands true today?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important to have that touch point for the consumer, and I think if you're starting out on a brand and a journey, figuring out what you want to do, but if you're going to look at doing wholesale, I think having a retail operation providing that instant access to the consumer is really key. And then on top of that, establishing a really loyal sort of membership base, people that are going to support you, especially for the first sort of 12 months to 2 years, I think is really key. And I think that sort of helped with the pandemic for us, certainly, because people really wanted that local artisan product, whether it was coffee, whether it was a baker or a brewer, and I think having that following was really good for us in terms of getting people in. And I think the other thing is obviously with a retail operation, you get the benefits of having better cash flow, so you can then leverage that to go into wholesale and be able to get your beer out there in the wholesale market, which is not a cheap exercise, and it's not an exercise you can do really easily and quickly. So I think, yeah, two models still work for me.
I guess another option bringing beers to brand is through contract brewing, what they still call it Gypsy Brewing at the ARBAs last night. Mazen, you work with a few contract brands who don't have a brewery of their own or a venue. Do you think that's still a valid model now, and how can, if so, how?
So that model is kind of separated into two. So if you're asking me, if you're coming to the market with a contract brand, I think it's a very valid model because that's foolproof. So if we do have another pandemic, then you don't have any costs associated. The guy making the beer will hold the bucket at the end. If you are planning to contract brew, the one thing that we saw through COVID was contract brewers could cancel tanks very quickly and put us in a very precarious position. The message that came out of COVID is you need to be diversified into everything. I think that what most of the brewers say. I still think being focused is the way to go for us. We still don't have a front of house. We got hammered because we lost 40% of our business, which was kegs. It literally overnight in Victoria went from, we were up 80% year on year to negative. We had to take kegs back from the market. So it was particularly hard for us. But if you're really focused on what you do and you take care of your people during any pandemic, then for us, that was the way to come out of it. But I agree in diversifying your revenue streams. Like, we're selling shit online, and that never happened before. I mean, literally, we didn't have a website the first 2 years of our business. And last year, we were selling a carton a week online, and all of a sudden now if we do anything below 1,500 a day, we're like, this has been a shit day, what's wrong, why aren't people coming?
From a retail perspective, Ben, what would you see as the challenges for new breweries coming into the industry now? I guess everyone wants to be in your fridges or launched at your bar.
I think that's probably the biggest thing coming in now. If you're going to come in and make, a 5% XPA, you've got 100 different breweries, large, small, in between. So you've got to work out before you even start what you want to do, where you want to sit, and what makes what you're doing different to every other brewery out there. And it's become a bit of a joke at Carwyn. We're getting basically 2 new breweries a week. And one of the breweries we know is a very keen golfer, and those of you who know, we have a putting green upstairs in our office. And it was literally, if you can put the ball in the hole, we'll put your beer in the fridge. Because it was exactly the same as 14 other beers that we tasted the last 3 weeks. And that's where it's got to now. So I think unless you're really clear on what you want, it's a tough market.
Zoe, if you were approached, if you were still not attached to Brick Lane and working with Totem, if a new brand approached you and said, okay, we want to launch into the beer industry now, what would be the key messages that you might give them?
Yeah, just the same as the rest of the panel. Just know who you are and what your difference is. The moment you stop being a home brewer and you're selling beer for commercial gain, it's never about you and your beer anymore, it's about your consumer. So you need to identify who that is, who your community is. They're the ones you're doing it for, and that's what retailers want to see too. They want to know what your point of difference is. That's how you're going to connect with the consumers. That's how you're going to build your little loyal following around you. Without them, a brewery's nothing. You may as well just still be in your backyard.
Any questions at this point? Yes, Nick? So I was going to say, the question is, you think with the changes of the past year or so, has the online model, is that here to stay direct selling? I have to repeat for the video, that's all.
So I think it's very important that we don't read too far into what COVID has produced as well, because the consumer patterns during COVID are very different. When someone can't go out of their home, can't go to the pub, at least I'm speaking from a Victorian perspective, because we had 119 days of lockdown, which was very different to the experience in the rest of the country. But when consumers can't go to the pub and buy a pint, and they've got disposable income, which is government supported, basically JobKeeper and JobSeeker, a lot of people spent a lot of money on discretionary spending. And so they were very happy to buy one-off $15 cans of beer. I think that model is sustainable during a COVID lockdown. I don't know if it is necessarily sustainable outside of a COVID lockdown. But that doesn't change the fact that COVID taught us all to engage locally. I buy coffee from my favorite roaster because during COVID, I was afraid that my local coffee shop was going to be out of business. And I didn't want to see that. And I think consumers accelerated their move away from the big multinationals during COVID, because no one gives a damn if CUB is still around, because they'll be around and they'll probably outlive all of us. But they wanted to make sure that their little local brew pub was okay. And so, yes, there is a shift. There is a direct consumer shift definitely here to stay, but I wouldn't read too much into the COVID patterns just yet.
I think one way to look at it is people were spending a lot more money on $15 or $20 Tallboy, big cans of something crazy to have at home because they had more money. But you're not going to, if you go into a pub with that same beer on, a pub experience is very different to a bar experience. You want to sit there for a few hours, and that beer is probably going to cost you $28 on tap, and you're going to go, I want to have a few, pints of IPA or pale ale. I don't see I guess it'll take time to see, but I don't see the demand sticking around for so many of those big beers all the time. Like people, once they get back out and away from their couch, I think they're going to want back to more drinking.
That wasn't quite my question though. So, sorry. What I meant was like, talk about diversity of revenue stream. And so, like Richard said, stay local. What if I'm from Melbourne and I'm a massive BentSpoke fan because I went to Canberra one time, and then I become one of his like local consumers because I buy it every time it pops up online. And that's
So if
direct to me, so I don't have a reliable bottle shop. You know what I mean?
so I guess yeah. So strengthening that direct, almost cutting out the venue and retail, and people are going, I like this brewery, I'm going to keep, every time I see their latest post online.
I get stuff that pops up, like I'll get the six-pack of something new, and I'll get a couple of six-packs in my face.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I was going to raise as well is the rise of the sort of the beer club as well, and subscription models as well. People doing, whether it's a brewery or a bottle shop or a venue, doing a mixed pack, that seems to have been a bigger thing. And I guess, do people think they're going to sort of live on as well?
I think definitely those mix packs, our subscription site got so busy we had to move it to its own website during COVID. And the other thing we noticed about locals, we got a lot of business during COVID of people, they'd find the breweries they couldn't get in Queensland. So Mr. Banks and Deeds, the start of COVID, we did a whole heap interstate. When they all launched their own direct sales, our sales dried up, which is perfectly fine, it happens. And I know talking to both those guys, they're selling a lot more direct themselves interstate to markets they don't distribute to. And I think that's helped everyone kind of get that connection with the brewery that they really like, which you don't get normally if you see the beer once a year. So I think that's something that's definitely here to stay. The other thing we've noticed, talking about specialties and things, and Maz is going to love this, but 440s, especially for us, of the hypey IPAs and hazies, have slowed down in the last 6 weeks like nothing you've ever seen. We've got other half still on the shelf from 6 weeks ago, which, 2 years ago would have lasted 15 seconds.
I've heard similar stories from other local bottle shops as well. The bigger, hazies and oat creams and stuff slowing down.
Yeah, and there's so many of them.
And just to add to this, like we're talking about volume and sales here. We've also got to remember every time someone goes online, this is another chance for you to grow your community. So you're not going to be a successful business by just selling that one case. You're going to be a successful business by repeat purchases. So that's volume and sales are great, but you need that opportunity to bring them onto your mailing list, into your social media, that constant engagement. So you end up building that relationship that if you do go interstate, you make sure that you make the time to go visit them. That if you do see them online, you're going to like their posts, you're going to share the news with your friends. Like, they become your loyal advocates, and that's where the repeat sales ends up coming from, and that's good business.
I think online is to stay. I guess what you're saying is, if you can do it, you need to have an online store and manage it well and get the beer out in a timely manner, or merch or what have you. I guess even having merch and a wide range of products to sell, and you often see small breweries maybe selling actually coffee beans or mixed packs with wine or whatever from their mates in the industry, and actually diversifying that way as well, I think.
If anyone is thinking of starting a brewery during this period, Zoe mentioned something that's quite important. When we started 961 Beer, 961 Beer, Hawker's Beer, Jesus, you brought me back. When we started the Hawker's Beer, we didn't have a website. You very, very quickly during COVID learned the complexity of e-commerce. And by e-commerce, we're not just engaging with you when you come onto our website. Every time I click into my Facebook, I get a Brick Lane ad because I checked their website, right? And this isn't some big brother conspiracy theory. This is managing your Facebook pixel. This is managing, you no longer are just on emails because you bought something, here's a confirmation. You're on a MailChimp or a Klaviyo or an Omnisend, which is looking at when was the last time you purchased. Are you due for a top-up? I'm going to automate the flow to shoot you an email. Oh, you left something in your cart. Here's a 10% off, come back. The complexity of the business has shifted from being, here's a nice beer, leave us alone. If it doesn't stink, fuck off. Now it's more a case of, you're interested in the IPA. Listen, if you really don't like the IPA, maybe try a pale. Oh, you don't like the pale? How about a lager? And just leave me alone, you know. But it engages the consumer on a different level.
I guess from a supplier perspective, are there fresh challenges for breweries these days, you know, in post-COVID, or has, you know, is malt equipment and hops and all that stuff stayed, I mean, as it was?
No, it definitely hasn't stayed as it was. We're directly affected by the breweries, and what happened during COVID severely kicked the system. I think there's two fundamentals when it comes down to supply, and it's organisation and communication. And one of the things that COVID brought out was the paramount importance to communicate to your suppliers, let them know everything that's going on, because it was a shit time. And if there's some way we can share the burden, we can help each other out, well, put your hand up, let us know. And the brewing community of Australia and New Zealand all did that. Like, we saw it happening, we saw people's results, you know, bottoming out. And it's hard to watch, but we can react to it. So it was really humbling to get the communication train up and running, and it made us realise how important it was. So yeah.
One thing that I guess we touched upon is how many more limited releases there are around now. How many more, I guess, crazy beers and, you know, just and one-offs. And some people have, you know, posed the question: is the core range dead? You know, are people still interested in core range beers? And I guess if you're starting a brewery, you kind of want to know: do I need to have a core range of 2, 3, 4, 5 beers, or should I just think I'm going to go and focus on new the whole time? Any thoughts on that?
So again, when we first started, we deliberately chose not to have a core range. We opened as a brew pub, pretty much keg only. We wanted to have constantly rotating different beers on all the time. But running a pub pretty much shows you straight away that you always have to have beers that are going to have mass appeal, which are core range beers, lager, pale ale, IPA. It's what people want to see all the time. So whether we wanted to do that or not, the market dictated that we had to have those offerings. And so I would say that there is still room for core range. People are still always going to want to have a 4-pack or a 6-pack beer. They want to have a pint, a sessionable beer, an IPA, a pale, whatever. And so, yeah, there is still range. However, if you're operating a brew pub, it gives you that opportunity to have a lot of fun and flexibility in your range, and so you don't necessarily have to have something that is constant and the same all the time. You can keep rotating through different things.
What about with Hawkers and BentSpoke? Where does your split sort of sit between core range sales and limited? Because you both put out a fair number of sort of sought after limited releases throughout the year, but where does, you know, how much of your total sales is your core beers?
Yeah, for us, we're probably about 90% core, and I still believe there's a lot of value in having a core range, especially for wholesale and in the brew pub, but maybe a lesser sort of core range in the brew pub. I think you've done all this hard work to engage with your consumer, and the consumer might be starting out their journey into craft beer as well. So you've just given them this great beer, they've got used to it, and then they go and try and buy it, and they can't buy it anymore. And I think that maybe then they've got to start their journey again, and you've wasted all that time and effort in trying to convert them into craft beer. So for me, having a core range that has a bit of variety is, I reckon, critical to launching wholesale, especially outside of your local area.
Yeah, for us, it's about 80-90% core range as well. People forget that 95% of the market still drinks Carlton Draft. And so if you think you're going to engage your market with the next color of hazy, whatever the bloody hop is of the day, then you're fucking deluded. But it depends what size you want to go to, right? If you're ambitious to sell 100,000 liters, you can't do it with core, with no core, for sure. But if you plan to be a 4, 5, 6 million liter brewery with no core, good luck. I'd like to watch that, and I will take my hat off for that. But the thing is, I think that the temptation always is to think towards, to gear ourselves towards the pointy end of the market. And it's much harder to compete in the pale ale category than it is to have the next crazy ingredient in your beer. However, 95% of the market is still in that.
Well, even within craft beer, the biggest selling styles by a mile are pale ales, sort of summer ale, Pacific ale. I think even XP. I think even lagers up there. IPA might be coming into fourth now, whatever. You know, so it still sits that way. Ben, you were going to.
One of the things we've noticed, and with core range, there's a bit of a change in definition as well. Because if you look at even people like Black Arts and Wildflower, they have a core range. They just happen to be, you know, $27 a bottle wild ferment, 750 mils. So they're still there even in the pointy end breweries. And I think that's kind of definitely changed in the last probably 12 months, that core range doesn't have to be 5% XPA, lager, IPA. It can be, it's kind of almost more what you're great at brewing. That becomes your core range, you know, and if it's smaller volumes, it gets sold for more because it's going to be a better product, you know. So that's something that I think certainly changed in the last 2 years.
Jessie, I'm thinking of some of the clients you have, say Blackman's, Ocean Reach, they're putting out a lot of limited releases that you'll be doing the design for. What's the sort of impact on a brewery, I guess, working with someone who has to provide fresh packaging every time in terms of time or cost or whatever to them? I mean, I know with Mazen, you've now got an in-house designer sat there just doing two different label designs every week. I mean, what's the impact on a business in terms of time and money and energy if they do want to be doing a new release every week or every 2 weeks?
I think it all depends on their plan and if they've got an actual plan put down. I'd suggest starting off with a plan and having a release structure within that. Most of our clients work with the core range, then the limited releases, and then if a limited release is popular, it becomes a seasonal. And then you can do as many line extensions from there as you want. Like with Hargraves Hill, we do the Pursuit of Hoppiness series. And as far as like costs around setting up a different label and artwork each time you do a new release, doing it in a series format's really clever because you can just set up a simple template and then easily interchange the graphics out. Especially if it's like, this is a little hint for you, if it's a texture or a pattern, they're usually like pretty quick to produce. So the cost to our clients is very minimal for each release that comes out, and it makes it affordable for them to be able to continually come up with new and exciting designs. But as long as you keep it within a consistent design template where your brand name is consistently placed, you can easily see what the beer style is. That would be my suggestion.
I guess, you know, if people are at the point where they're thinking into the market, what are the key sort of tips for them if they want to hone down to what their brand is going to be or to look like? Are there sort of, other than engaging someone like yourself to sort of go through the process, are there sort of things, is there homework that people can do to sort of get on the right track for how they're going to present themselves to market?
Define who you are to start with. That's the single biggest thing, because a designer...
You've got away with it though.
Well, yeah.
Despite being who you are.
And remember, your brand journey is very personal, but whatever you reflect into the market might not necessarily resonate, and we learned that the hard way. So we had a guy pushing a cart because of hawkers, because when I immigrated here, I thought, I didn't know what hawkers were, and so I wanted that to be the prevalent one. And then as I became an Australian, I thought, okay, I didn't like the graphics, so I moved to the Federation Star. And I was very convinced with that. And our design agency put pinstripes onto the can, and people said, fuck you. You took away my favorite beer. It's like, dude, it's still in the same can. Nah, won't buy it. We took away the pinstripes, and all of a sudden everyone was like, oh my God, your beer is so much better.
I legitimately was drinking with a customer at the bar last night, and he described Hawker's pinstripe beer as Aldi beer, and he didn't buy it while it was on there, and he started buying it again.
And it's exactly the same
It's exactly
fucking
the same beer.
So just so you know, your brand journey needs to reflect who you are, but it also might not resonate with the consumer. And remember, the consumer is so fucking fickle. Because when we did the branding change, we researched this, and there's a very famous article, the CEO of Slack. So Slack had the hashtag as their logo, and it had intersected in 8 different points, so they had 8 different colors. They simplified it to 4, and people said it looked like a swastika, it had 4 penises, and all this hammering until 2 weeks later, Zara changed their logo. And then people hammered Zara. And then people had 2 weeks after that hammered Celine, because Celine took the accent off the E in their logo. So be very conscious of your branding decisions,
I think defining who you are is really important. Absolutely, and it's definitely part of your brand foundation. But defining your target audience is just as important, because if you can define who your target audience is, you can make sure that you have a brand or a design that's not going to offend them. And additionally to that, you need to do what you were asking before, James, about how people go through and do a brand foundation themselves. There's some great resources online, but vision, values, story, purpose, all of that stuff that people kind of roll their eyes about because they don't really understand it, but then all the really successful breweries you see out there have got it solidified. It's all really important stuff, and it's easy to sort of brush to the side because it's not what brewers understand, and they shouldn't have to understand it. It's not their areas of expertise, but just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it isn't vital to your business. And when I mean vital, I mean make or break your business. So definitely there's a great resource online. They're a brand design company from the States called Kodo, and they actually have a step-by-step process of going through the vision, values, purpose, defining yourself, all of that. So jump online and go through that process yourself, and that's some homework you guys can do to get started. CODO.
Was that the one you got me to go through
Yes.
years ago? So when Jessie and I first got together to do the Crafty Pint rebrand a few years ago, we started going down this very esoteric, colourful route. And then I spoke to a few people, and some people didn't really get what we were doing with the new look. And then someone in WA who was really into branding late one night just said to me, she was like, no, I love what you do. And then you sent me that exercise, just said do 1 page of it. And I loved it, so I did the whole thing. And it was amazing how it changed my view on where we should be going. We still kept a lot of the elements I wanted, but it sort of puts you in the mindset of your audience and what other people would think about you and all that kind of stuff. And as soon as I sent the feedback to Jessie from that, the first thing she came back with was pretty much what the new Crafty Pint, I guess the whole look and feel has come from doing that exercise. So it was very powerful.
It gives you something to focus on.
And just further to Jessie's, like, once you've got that in place, stick to it. I think that's another thing in our world, is we get so excited by new shiny things because it's why we do craft beer, right? And then we want to do something else, and then we do something else, and you've lost who where you set yourself at the start. So even when something's big and tempting to take on, if you've made something like sustainability and the environment as your cause, and there's a huge volume that comes with sponsoring car racing, like, it's tempting to get the cash right, but if that's not true to who you are, you can't do it, because then that's when you start diluting your message and become even more confusing to the consumer.
Just a question, would you suggest doing some research into what your consumer base or your community would look like?
Yeah, like, and it's all out there, right? There's if you have a Facebook page, you've got the insights, you've got your trade customers. Get the research that's not in your inner circle, because obviously they're all going to tell you you're fantastic, and be prepared to hear the hard truths. Like, that's how you learn. That's where those things, where you can identify those gaps between where you think you are and where others see you at, is where you can really make your mark. That's where you can find out who you really are.
One quick question. The temptation always is to do the research and target your marketing towards the audience. I think the problem for us is be who you are and find the best way to get your message to the audiences. Don't just find where the gap is in the market and try and address it. Be genuine to who you are, because if you're fake, people will... When I'm nice to people, people call me out for being fake to them. So if I don't insult someone in the morning, they think something's wrong, right? And it's being genuine to who you are, because people will pick up when you're being fake. People know I don't give a shit about motorsports. If I sponsor a car race, not gonna happen.
Somebody shoot my dog once.
Did you?
You told me to shoot my
Did you? Well, what's wrong with you?
No, I think it's true. I think I've said a few times when I've been on a panel or doing this kind of thing, from my perspective as a journalist and a publisher, I think the strongest thing people have in craft beer to distinguish themselves from everyone else is your story. And I've seen some brands come along where they don't actually have a genuine story and they try and make one up, and people see through it soon enough. And you might think, oh, what is our story? It's your story. Like, whatever your story is, that's something that is genuine and you can stick to. And your story will grow once you've launched a business as well. On this sort of, I guess, on the values and branding kind of thing, there's been a fair bit of discussion in this room over the week around inclusivity and diversity and how we make the beer world more, I guess, welcoming for all. And it's still a fairly male-dominated industry and pretty white. You can even say Northern European descent white. And there's also been, unfortunately, a lot of discussion around sexism and all these issues being raised in the States recently. Is that something people need to be considering from the start as well? Like, is there any, is our brand gonna, I guess, alienate anyone? Is that something that you can start thinking about early?
Yes.
But and how can it be done? How important is that to someone starting out?
As a retailer, there's several brands in Australia we will not sell, and internationally for various reasons. And you from day one, you have to think about it. You can't not think about it. So,
and I think when people have made missteps, whether in social media or in the past, some have risen above it, but some, it can be hard. And I guess it needs to be something you think about the whole time, is how are you presenting yourself to the outside world? Because there is a pretty engaged and quite educated consumer in craft beer, and if you do slip up, people are going to be all over you.
There was Black Hops Pussy Juice beer and how they dealt with that. There's Frenchies, there's Founders, there's a whole bunch of them. Sexism, racism. I'm fairly risk averse by nature, and the second anything happens, I'm out. And I know I'm not the only retailer in that position.
My argument to you is actually be true to yourself. If you're racist and sexist, don't get into this business.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. I think what we're talking about is a fundamental to life at the moment, and I don't think it's all that relevant to the beer industry by itself. I think it's just,
because
it's how everyone is.
It always, the racists and the sexists tend to slip up and say something stupid at some point. And so if you're really that kind of an asshole, don't get into the business. It's a no-deckhead policy over here.
I would say that racist and sexist people, though, don't think that they're racist and sexist, so they're going to enter the industry and think they're a good guy. So I think building it into your plan from the start, how you're going to have diverse staff, how you're not going to exclude people from your marketing, I think that is super important, and you can be part of the change for good. And also acknowledging like your own sexism and your own racism. That was a little journey that I went on last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, and just reflecting on yourself and thinking, oh shit, there were moments where I was a little bit racist. Whereas I've always sort of thought to myself and held myself up on a high pedestal, thinking that I'm not racist at all. My dad's Indian, I've got plenty of black friends, but actually just taking the time to reflect on yourself and understand that we're all learning, and to not be on your high horse, and to make sure that everybody around you is learning as well.
Yeah, 100%. This industry is quite a young industry, I think we'll have to agree. And it's something that the IBA has also been looking at. Like, we've always had this focus on being technical and making sure we give as much brewer information as possible, but now it's like there's a fundamental shift. We need to start looking at attitudes, personalities, and making sure that that sort of behaviour it's definitely not welcome in the industry. Too good to be fucked up by that shit.
Okay, so the question is, how do people in the industry rationalise producing, selling alcohol when it can be damaging some people in the community?
It's a very fair question, and it's a very thin line of trying to understand it. There is also the fact that alcohol, especially beer, has been with us since 15,000 BC, and it has played a very positive role in society. I'm not belittling the negative impact it has on a lot of people, and this is why we're trying to promote the culture of responsible service of alcohol, the responsible consumption of alcohol, right? But also, alcohol has had very positive impact in the human development, whether it was with Louis Pasteur finding germ theory, or whether it was refrigeration in the 1800s, or whether it was in the Middle Ages actually saving people from dying from water poisoning. So it's been an integral part of our history for 17,000 years, and to just kind of dismiss it as being this negative impact is also very dangerous.
But at the same time, I guess that within the craft beer world, there is generally a message of drink better, drink less, just drink, I'm not saying it always happens during beer festivals, but there is that messaging around, as you said, very strong with RSA, keeping an eye on how much people have had, but also it's like, maybe you spend more to drink less, actually enjoy the flavour. I think that's, but I think that duty of care, but also I think during Good Beer Week as well, highlighting, the stories behind the beer, pairing it with food, the flavours, the tech, just trying to educate people so when they drink something, they respect the agricultural background for it, the time and skill that's gone into it, the flavours they're getting. When you talk about, say, a Black Arts or a Wildflower beer, you might buy one of those 750ml bottles and either share it or spend 2 hours drinking it because it's something you want to sip and savour. So
I think it's something, this is a little bit personal for me because my brother-in-law's just got out of rehab. As someone who sells it to the consumer all the time, we see people all the time in the bar that there's something wrong. The best way we found to deal with it, apart from the usual RSA stuff, is make friends with them and talk to them and find out what's going on. Because once you can have a chat, we've actually had 3 or 4 customers now recently after COVID who've asked us to stop serving them for 6 months. They wouldn't have done that if my staff hadn't had a chat to them, see how they're going, that sort of stuff. So you've just got to be kind of a little bit upfront, but make friends with your customers, because if you've got a brew pub, you'll see it. There's no getting around it. So you've just got to do the right thing. So.
We're all got to watch out for each other.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I was actually talking to someone yesterday. It potentially needs to be discussed a bit more in the industry as well. There are, I would say, some functioning alcoholics in the industry who've been around a long time, and I don't know quite how they do it, But I think it is sort of discussed within groups, but whether it needs to be, you know, more of a focus of a wider industry discussion, because there's a lot of pretty high alcohol beers being produced these days, and it, you know, it doesn't take much. You can have, you know, one can and perhaps, you know, become more risky in your drinking after just one can of strong beer. So it is. I mean, it is something that's I think people are aware of, and yeah, it's. I think it's certainly. So I'd say there's more focus in craft beer because I guess the big breweries are very big on their, you know, the messaging around there, at least, you know, on the surface. Yeah, any more questions at this point? Yes. So yeah, thoughts on the rise of sort of low alcohol and no alcohol beers? Because I mean, yeah, yeah. Well, we did a blind tasting at the end of last year purely of non-alcoholic beers, and I think we had 25 on the lineup, and that included maybe 4 or 5 from overseas. But the majority were actually from small independent Australian brewers. So it's something that's growing. And I know Modus, for example, with their Nort, I think they're selling a ton of that, and Heaps Normal selling well. I guess maybe the brewers first, like, what are your thoughts on the sector?
Yeah, look, we've always done a reduced alcohol beer, and even when I was at the Wigan Pen in '96, I was still making reduced alcohol beer there, and I think it really has a place. I think, especially with, you know, drink driving and things like that, I think it's really important to give people options. With the zero alcohol beer, really interested to see how that goes, and I think, yeah, definitely that's here to stay, and we'll probably look at doing something in that space at some point in time.
If you think of beer as part of your lifestyle choice rather than just an alcohol consumption, so I'm having this beer with that food, or I'm having this beer during that time of the day, then low alcohol and zero alcohol beers do have a space in that, because they are also a lifestyle choice, and they're a choice for people who still want to experience the flavor profiles to some degree and not have the alcohol back end of it. Personally, we haven't yet looked at doing one. I understand the need for one, and I understand the space for one, and we might look at one in the future, but currently no.
The interesting thing with no alcohol especially, I know for ourselves, Beer Cartel, Mr. West and Brewski, one of our top 3 products for all of us is Heaps Normal, and they've been around 6 months. Heaps Normal is outselling both of these guys' beers in any of their single SKUs comfortably. So it's definitely, it's here to stay.
And I think what's helped it is that there's still some terrible ones out there, as our blind tasting proved, but some of them are good, like Heaps Normal. Yeah, Heaps Normal's a good one. There's a couple from Upflow that are good. Like, there are people have worked out how to do it better now. You know, I'm not saying you're going to have even the best one and go, oh, that's as good as my favourite beer, but people have, yeah, they're working out how to do it now, which does make a difference. But yeah, just choose wisely.
And I mean, also remember, this is still very new for all of us, yeah? So we'll still see how that sector develops. I'd like to wait a bit as a very kind of conservative brewer to kind of see what will happen in this space.
I think as well, if you go back a few years, when I was first getting into the craft beer industry over here, there was this real stigma around light beers or mid-strengths, and hardly anyone made one. You know, hardly any breweries made them. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, everyone started putting mid-strengths into their lineup and got better at it as well. They worked out how to get better hop character and balance and flavour and mouthfeel into a 3.5% beer. And I guess almost the rise of fruit sours, you know, these Blennerweiss sort of Goza-style beers that were generally sort of 3.5%, I guess, help change perceptions. So I guess it's one of those things that, you know, over time, as perceptions change, they'll potentially become more accepted. Any more questions at this point? I think maybe moving on to sort of more the practical side of starting a brewery. How do people go about sourcing equipment and establishing relationships with suppliers when they actually want to have their stainless steel and their venue and the stuff they need to actually make beer? Dan?
Equipment-wise, I mean, there's a lot of options out there, and it depends on your budget. I think is the.
What was your budget at the start? $7,000 or something?
Yeah, sweet fuck all. Yeah, we definitely did the minimum viable product, and so we adopted the what can we buy as cheaply as possible and repurpose and try and put together a brewery. The jury's out whether that's a good model or not, because it certainly is incredibly labour intensive. But at our scale, you know, I was happy to be there 80 hours a week. My wife, not so much, but that's okay. We're still together.
Maybe it's because of that you're still together.
Yeah, maybe. I think now, thankfully, there's a lot of people who've gone on this journey before us, before you, and a lot of them have spent a lot of time documenting all their journey in terms of finding suppliers and working with reputable suppliers. There's a lot of consultants out there who work very hard with manufacturers all over the world, and there's a lot of amazing equipment coming out at very reasonably priced now, particularly out of China. So that's an option. But there's also people domestically as well putting together some great stuff. So it's just a question of doing your homework but working out your budget, I think, is where to start.
How did you go about it, Rich? Because you started off with I guess you've been in brewing for a while in a brew pub before you opened your own brew pub, and then obviously you've since stepped up to have the production facility, and there's a new canning line going in, and so, you know, have you changed your approach over the years?
I don't know whether I've changed my approach. I've certainly learnt from where I started, and we had, when I was at the Wigan Pen, we had a 6 hectolitre brewery, and we were probably doing about, I think we were doing about 40 kegs a week or something like that in a 120 person venue. So when we decided to set up BentSpoke, we could see the market had changed. And when I started, there were seven small breweries in Australia, and I think when we started at BentSpoke 7 years ago, there was, I don't know, 400 and something. So it had changed a hell of a lot, and we thought we wanted to set up a bigger tap room because 120 people wasn't enough. So then we sized our brewery in the brew pub to be able to cater for that increase. So we put in a 12 hectolitre system, which allowed us to do some wholesale on kegs as well out of the brew pub as well. And we had a plan when we were doing the brew pub actually to set up another facility as a production facility if everything went to plan. And luckily enough it did, so we were able to set up that production facility based on having the right brewery in the brew pub. So we have one brewer in the brew pub, and they do about 3,000 litres a week, which is really, I think, pretty good labour-wise. And we spend a little bit more on the brewery, but our running costs are so much lower. So the margin we're making on our beer in the brew pub is higher, and I think it's important to think about that and get that right. It might be better investing a little bit more at the start, have lower running costs, because let's face it, you're there for the long haul. The brewery's it's going to be around for 20 years, hopefully, so you're going to get that return on it pretty quickly. And with that better cash flow, then you can invest that into a production facility. And we sort of went around the same idea with the production facility as well, sort of trying to do something a bit bigger at the start and not need as much labour, because obviously labour's a big cost. So we only have 4 brewers at the moment in our production facility doing 3 million litres, which I think is probably pretty good, pretty efficient in industry standards. So I'd recommend thinking about how big you want your tap room, and then size the brewery to that, and then work out, obviously, if you're going to be on a wholesale journey as well.
What's the biggest error people make when judging the size they need to come into the industry of their breweries? People always build too small, or is there generally?
I think it's about getting the model right. If you're going to, we could never do any wholesale out of the Wigan Pen at 6 hectolitre brewery, even out of the brew pub at 12 hectolitre, making 18 different beers on tap and selling 3,000 litres. We hardly had any spare capacity to do a lot of wholesale out of the brew pub. And I think a lot of breweries sit in that middle ground, somewhere between a brew pub and a wholesale brewery, and it's very labour intensive to make and sell kegs of beer. And if you're not making much margin on them, then you're not really getting value for the effort that you're putting in. So I'd be careful about trying to wholesale from a small size brewery.
And what about yourself, Mazen? How did you decide to go with because you always planned to do contract brewing for others at the start as well, and you had ambitious growth plans. So how did you set upon the size of brewery you went for?
Well, contract brewing for us is only 30% of the business right now. So it's really, we're predominantly a Hawker's Rover brewery. I mean, Rover this year will do 1.2 million litres for us, just Rover on its own, which is a nice little beer in a can, very simple. But define who you are and then figure out the equipment that you need. The big problem is a lot of breweries are set up by brewers. And brewers tend to be operations people, not commercial people. And I don't think there's ever been an airline that's been successful that was set up by a pilot or a hospital that was set up by a doctor. It's quite the rarity, right? Understand your market and then figure out how do I get there. The additional difficulty if you're thinking of setting up a brewery today is we have the new excise rebate. I never in my life thought I would agree with Richard on this one, but I've lived to eat my words. We had this whole argument ages ago about reducing excise and giving more excise breaks. My argument has always been to equate beer with spirits and wine competitively. And the government, in its greatest wisdom, gave us the excise drop from 48 litres to 8, which killed the growler market and opened us up to imports. And now they've given everyone $350,000 rebates. So effectively what this means in the market today, if you're trying to enter the market, is your first 125,000 litres is excise free. And if you're in the middle ground like me and Richard, we're having to compete with CUB and Lion Nathan and all these guys who have tremendous financial resources. But all of a sudden we also have the smaller guys who basically are now operating tax-free. They can sell a $100 keg and still make money. So be very conscious when you enter the market, not just about the size of your equipment or how you plan to get there. What are the threats that are coming from each side of the business?
What about the ingredient side of things then? Because you're not going to make beer without malt and hops and yeast. So are there sort of simple key messages around in terms of establishing relationships with key suppliers?
I don't know, anything's possible. You might be able to make beer in 10 years' time without ingredients, who knows? Yeah, look, I said it before, organisation and communication. I think communication for me is the key, and you can never get in touch with your suppliers too early. One of the cardinal sins I see is a home brewer that becomes a commercial brewer, and they'll go to the home brew shop, they'll buy their ingredients and they'll build their recipes, and they'll go and buy their equipment, and they'll call up the supplier, and then they'll realise that there's no Galaxy or there's no Citra, or the malt that they wanted is actually not available for 12 months or something. So when you are generating those recipes, yes, chat to your homebrew store and purchase your ingredients, but don't ever be frightened to call your suppliers and actually ask, hey, how do I get this for... How much is it? Yeah, definitely ask how much it is. Because, it's like I'm from the hop background, and they're agricultural products. So, we are reliant upon Mother Nature, and things do happen. You only get one crack at hops every year, and you get 2 cracks at barley. So it's important that you plan. And if you're starting a brewery, let's say March next year, and you want to use Citra, well, you have to think back from a farmer's perspective as when was that Citra put in the ground? Because it stems all the way back. You need to tell the farmers what you need so that they can prepare for it. So communication and organisation, like if you can get all your ducks in a row and you've got your recipes and you've spoken about ingredients, you can save yourself a lot of money by packaging things up and make sure you're hitting the right suppliers.
Any questions at this stage? I guess...
Just one thing further to that, I think that's good, John, but the other part to that is that you need to understand what the ingredients are. You need to get the technical specs on all those ingredients, because that's going to directly affect your quality of your beer. So you need to have really good relationships with your suppliers so that you can get all the technical components of the ingredients you're using to really be consistent in making your beer and make really good beers as well. So if you don't have that relationship, you're going to struggle to make beer consistently. And I think that's the key to a lot of the time to success is being able to make beer consistently.
So let's assume you've got your brewery, your venue, your beers, your recipes sorted. What are the keys to securing a tap at Carwyn for like half an hour before they move on to someone else? But so securing taps in venues, securing fridge space, is it down to the story, the beer, the styles, the sales reps you have, the look of your product? Like, what are the key things that people need to consider about actually selling and keeping venues and bottle shops buying from?
I think one of the things we've noticed, and probably we've been going 13, 14 years, if you've got a good rep, that counts for a huge amount. So whoever's representing you in the market is incredibly important. And we've actually had one rep move companies, and they've become one of our biggest suppliers as they move companies, because they do such a good job. They look after you. They do everything right. After that, you need a reason for someone to pick it off the shelf. You walk into a fridge of any craft beer shop now, there's 7 or 8 shelves with a whole heap of different labels and packs and cans, and you've got to find a reason for someone to pick it up. That's probably, to me, the two biggest things, because it's into the venue and then out the door again.
In terms of getting someone to pick something out of a fridge, Jessie, have you sort of had any lessons or learnings over the years that sort of what works and what doesn't work? Obviously, all of yours work fantastically, I'm sure. But
Obviously. It depends what's going on with the fads and the trends of the time. It's a very fast-paced industry, so things come and go very quickly. It's kind of like a little mini fashion run on the shelves. So there's not sort of one thing that you can say will help you stand out on the shelf, because it depends on what you've got surrounding you. And because there is such an amazing array of beautiful artwork, it is hard to stand out. But I think you've got to think about what you want your customers to see, and if you've got a really big, solid following that might be able to recognise you on, just say like with Garage Project, they've got a huge following. Their artwork is spectacular. They do not have consistent brand placement or templates like I encourage all of my smaller clients to do. So there's sort of not really one kind of rule, but I think if you're a smaller brewery, especially if you're starting out, one thing that I could say consistently is to make sure that you have your beer style really legible and large, because if people don't know your brand, they're going to look for a beer style first and what they feel like drinking first. And I know, like in Carwyn, you guys have your shelves organised according to style, but not everyone does it. And often, and it's same at the bar lineup too, with your tap decals as well. People walk up to the bar, you've got a few seconds to grab their attention. They're usually going to know what sort of beer style they feel like. So as long as your style is legible, that's sort of one rule that you can kind of say works most of the time.
The other thing probably good to note is don't afraid to be simple and clear. Rover, obviously, it's the black and gold colours. It's a name it's like an image we all recognise. The other one is Garage Project. They have a beer called Beer, and it says beer on the front, and that's all it is, and it's just a lager, but it sells incredibly well. So if you're going to do it and keep it simple, just make sure it's really simple and really clear, because that also, the reverse of that stands out on our shelf and anyone's shelf, because lots of labels have got lots of stuff on it, so you're the opposite end of the spectrum. So
Be true to who you are. You don't necessarily have to sell at Carwyn if your plan is to make a 4% lager. Don't stress if you're not in a certain place. Don't always think of the usual suspects. Don't feel deflated if Ben Carwyn says, "Nah, I'm not going to carry your beer." There's 18,000 liquor licenses in Victoria alone and 85,000 liquor licenses in Australia. Understand who you want to be. When Hawker started, we spent our first year in North Melbourne. We didn't even cross the Yarra River. We had 3 reps covering just North Melbourne, doing nothing else. We wouldn't cross South Bank. Fed Square was on the outer boundaries of where we were. So understand where you are. We went to the little corner bottle shop that had 0 craft, and normally would have some Lebanese guy watching YouTube behind the counter not giving a shit about beer. And we spent a lot of time engaging with these guys because we were the first people in craft there. In fact, so much so that the other day Nicoletta admitted when she joined Pirate Life, she would literally look up our map and chase us around and go in and go, "You're selling hawkers, you'll probably get some sales out of Pirate Life, you should put this on." So don't figure out who you are and where you want to be. That's the most critical thing. Don't just, "Oh, I've got to be at Beer Deluxe."
So I guess you'd have something to offer here. Like, how long have you been at Brick Lane now? Because I guess I think you've done a lot to change perceptions, and I'm assuming increased sales. I mean, what were the key sort of ideas you took into your role there?
At Brick Lane, well, I'm one of the marketing team. We have an amazing guy that leads our innovation, and he really understands that journey between the beer that the brewer's making and getting all excited about, and how to just make it look so good in a can. But then the story that comes with each of those beers, which then he helps me get that word out. So yeah, we're definitely part of a team that gets it across the line. But yeah, just like everyone else, be consistent, be true, stick to who you are, be bold. Like, definitely go out there. Like, definitely aim high. Go to Carwyn. Like, sorry for another ref on your plate. But yeah, don't get dejected. Like, yeah, to Maz's point, it's a very busy, cluttered market out there. Celebrate the little wins, and just keep going at it. And yeah, further to Ben's point too, who you have representing you on the road is huge. You know, if you can do it yourself, if you're having someone representing you, like, really take that time to make sure they're the right person. They are your ambassador. And it's pretty easy to get caught up in the hype of beer, that people that love beer aren't necessarily the ones that can sell it properly, and do your brand justice. You're the one putting all that hard work in, and then to let it go at the 11th hour because you just haven't got the right person representing you would be a real shame.
It's actually best not to have stupidly passionate beer people selling beer.
Our top beer rep, who is currently our national sales manager, started with hawkers because his brother was involved with me as a business partner, and then he had a divorce. He was a pizza chef. He didn't give a shit about beer, never drank an IPA in his life. And his first job was being an off-premise sales rep because no one wanted to do the glory of walking into a bottle shop with some guy who doesn't care about beer. And then in his first month and a half, he scored nothing. And then within 6 months, he had 150 bottle shops. He fell in love with beer later, but he's today our national sales manager. It's very important to understand you're in an FMCG market. I know we want to talk about the passion, but the underlying basics from a business perspective are the same as selling batteries or shampoo or toothpaste. We all want to get our product out there, but the same principles that apply to selling craft beer, not from a passionate perspective, apply to the whole of the FMCG market.
Any questions? I was thinking to end up, I'll go down the line and you can all give your final thought or your one key message you want to get across. To give you time to think about that, Jessie has an announcement, a new project you're launching.
I almost forgot.
I almost forgot that she's announcing for the first time today. We'll have a story about it on Crafty Pint next week that is relevant to people getting into brewing. So I don't know if you want to announce your big thing.
Well, so right now we're launching the inaugural Brew Rocket grant. It's a grant for startup breweries. We've partnered with the Crafty Pint, with Rapid Labels, with Suntap Decals, and with Peach Business Management. There's a whole range of stuff that we're offering as part of the grant, but it's basically a full brand package from Craft Instinct, promotion from Crafty Pint, labels and tap decals, and some business advisory, all wrapped up in the Brew Rocket grant. So if you are planning on starting a brewery before August 31st, 2022?
I haven't looked at the details yet.
21.
Next week.
Applications close August 31st, 2021. But if you're thinking of opening a brewery soon, get in touch with us. We've got an application form. There is a catch, though. You must have an environmental or social enterprise focus as part of your brand. The reason being is that everyone who's partnering on this, on the Brew Rocket grant, wants to be able to contribute to the greater good of the world, and this is a good way to do it. So it comes from a kind of selfish point of view, I guess, as well. But that's the catch. So if you're thinking of opening a brewery and you haven't thought about putting a social or sustainable or environmental focus on there, it's a good idea to do, because you could get the grant. It's around about $30,000 to $40,000 in value, so it's well worth your time. It's a very quick application form that will be emailed to you once you get in touch with us, and good luck.
And Jessie's a very lovely person to work with as well, so, you know, you get that bonus as well. Any questions on topics we haven't covered at all? Yeah? So the question is, what yeah, so the question is, what do the panel think of using like a consultancy or advisory, like a brewery consultant service to get started? Yeah,
It's a very big question, because when you're setting up a brewery, I mean, there's counsel to get through, legal paperwork, environmental, trade waste, equipment selection, packaging, technical, recipe formula. I mean, the risk of probably, if you find that there's a gap in your knowledge base, absolutely find someone who knows what the hell they're doing, because it will save you in the long run. But finding these umbrella advisories, I think, is a bit lazy.
I guess in some ways as well, I think maybe more so in the past, people might be home brewers or have a passion to start a small brewery or a brew pub, and they'll get into it and just their recipes aren't right. You don't see it so often now, but when you do see it, it stands out a mile. There's one brew pub where they spent a lot of money in a Melbourne suburb. I won't name who it is. I've been in there once. I'm like, God, you spent so much money on making this a nice venue, and all your beers taste like average homebrew. Like it's a bad look for the industry, and I certainly won't go back there until someone tells me, oh, their beers have got really good now. And I think so in that case, it might be a good idea to either employ a experienced brewer, which is really bloody hard these days, or just get someone in who can actually work on your recipes and make your beers better. Like that's kind of really key, I think.
And find 5 different consultants, but don't find one that does everything.
Yeah, Nick?
On that, first of all, it's so shit that I know exactly the place you're talking about. But also, when you say consultants, just how many people here just have a board? Like they might be people you know throughout your previous careers or something, but just people you can bounce things off, whether it's your beer, whether it's your business decisions. Like they don't have to be people that are necessarily paid by you, they can be people that want to see you succeed. Like how, Richard, do you have, I mean, your experience now, and you guys are all on me.
Yes, Yes, it's saying how important is it to have a board of people, not necessarily in beer that you can bounce ideas off.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely rely on your network. Talk to people outside of the industry as well. They're going to be helpful in so many different places without you even realizing it. And so, yeah, just talking to people and sounding your ideas off everyone and anyone until it gets really boring and they won't want to talk to you anymore. But that's the way you're going to work out whether this is going to work.
Or do it internally. The other way is to trust the team that you have. If you recruit the right people, bouncing ideas off the right people, empowering your team to actually have input into the project is very important. So,
Yeah, we've had a board at Carwyn since we started, and we have an advisory board as well, and none of them are involved in the liquor industry. There's a professor of medicine, there's all sorts of bits and pieces. The more outside information you can get, I think is really, really valuable. And yeah, with the advisory thing, we still have a business advisor, have done since the day we started, and we will continue to. It's not just at startup. I don't know if you guys noticed, like even Big Shed has just put a new advisory board together, and they're 8 years in, and it's completely new, all new people to the business. So it's definitely worth doing.
I was thinking also there are people out there who know stuff, and whether they're on your board or not, you know, you can look outside the beer industry, you know, to learn stuff. I've been doing interviews over the last couple of weeks for a couple of big articles we're going to run next week, and I was chatting to this one woman who specialises in, well, I guess empowering women in industry, but also in workplace sort of safety and structure. And I was like, oh my God, I've been sort of trying to work these things out as a small growing business, and I can interview you for 45 minutes for this article, but actually I've learned so many things I actually can now go and do pretty easily to make my business sort of better set up. And then, you know, I guess I'm lucky as a journalist doing that. I speak to a lot of different people, but there are lots of experts out there who know stuff that can take you a long way in probably, you know, a day or 2 days that you might never get to otherwise. And so I guess it's just, you know, thinking, what do I actually want, and looking out there for who the experts are, or even speaking to other brewers, because brewers are generally very open about helping other people coming into the market, and just say, hey, how did you set this up, or who did you speak to find that out? You know, there are people who know stuff and specialise in stuff, and we, you know, don't be afraid to go and find them.
And further to that, Business Victoria has a whole heap of free templates and business plans and marketing plan templates. Because at the end of the day, you're setting up a business. It just happens to be a brewery. And again, we get caught up in the romance of making beer, that you actually have to focus on, do you have a business plan? Because if you don't have that from the start, you're destined to fail. So yeah, Business Victoria is a great place to get a whole heap of free templates to start with.
Do I need a business plan? Shit.
We've had this discussion.
Shit, 11 years in now. Any questions? Yes. How do you select a brewer to Yes, how do you Yeah, so how do you find the right brewer or a good brewer, and how do you hold on to them? And I think it's really bloody hard. We're actually working on a story at the minute because there's a massive skill shortage, both for brewers and in hospo after COVID as well. So yeah, how do you?
So we lost Daniel. He was our brewer. I think your question is very different to someone who has an operation relying on one brewer, versus someone like Hawker's, where we have a whole brew team, and people coming in and out of the business is quite. I mean, we try to retain obviously our people, right? But you can't stop the flow of people. Ultimately, if you're not the business owner, your vested interest in that business is very different, right? So as a big scale brewer, we have a whole technical committee, and we have a whole bunch of brewers, and we try and recruit because we have the resources, the best in class.
Ultimately, for me as well, it's really about making sure that they're the right fit for our team culture. You want to have a team that works together. You don't want to have, you know, someone who's won all these different awards all around wherever, and they can't work with other people in the team. So for me, that's really super important, and we'll probably look at hiring more people based on that rather than training and do our own in-house training, because you end up with a better team if you're doing that. If you're trying to get a brewer for the first time, it is tricky, but I'd probably look at a little bit more technical, experience, or people who have done some brewing courses if you were going to get a brewer for the first time. But at the end of the day, as a business owner, you've got to, they've got to fit into your culture as well. So something to think about.
that answer your question? Yep.
From my end, look, I mean, I was the brewer for a long time, so if I left, then the business would be fucked. But we now have a head brewer, and we were really, really lucky. He came to us, and which we felt very humbled by, with a lot of experience. This is the thing that's lacking, as James said, in the industry at the moment, is people with experience. Hopefully, as the borders open up again, we're a growing industry massively, and people will come to Australia. But it's offering the right thing as well. Be a business that people want to work for, and that's how you'll get people to come to you and stay with you. So yeah, that's what I would suggest.
The biggest thing as well is don't be afraid to hire someone who knows more than you. Our head brewer, our last several head brewers know more about brewing than my background is. I started brewing at 961 Beer before setting up Hawkers. But I can tell you, Hamish MacArthur kicks my ass on a technical level every fucking day with his hands tied behind his back. He was the head brewer for Asahi, and so I don't pretend to know better than him or Alex or a lot of the other brewers. Of course, you have to. You have no choice. Our last head brewer before Hamish started off on the packaging line with no previous brewing experience. Justin came to us from Holgate onto the pack line. We put him up on the brew deck and made him into a head brewer very quickly. So of course we do.
Is there an expectation that people have training beforehand now? Do you have to go to a brewing course?
How big is your brewery? Do you have a team to be able to train them or not? No, I mean, the answer is, how big is my brewery? Do I have the resources to train people up and invest in their training, or am I a small brewer that needs one guy to produce 3,000 liters of wort a week, and I don't have the resources to train him up?
I know there's a guy, Glenn Harrison, who's now technical brewer at Ellerslie, but when he was running breweries, he would always prefer to hire inexperienced or younger brewers because they didn't come in. You're like, I don't want someone coming with too many of their own ideas or too much attitude. I want to train them up and say, this is how we make beer here, and this is how the team works. And then the risk is you make them into a good brewer, and someone offers them a head brewer job or something elsewhere, and they go, and you put all this time and effort in for 2 or 3 years, and they go somewhere else. But I think more of that needs to happen. There are more training courses now. But
that's very dangerous as well, because you want your brewers not to just be trained. This is a very inbred industry. We all get ingrained in the practices that we do. And so at Hawkers, we actually will pay for your IBD if you go and get technically trained. Because we want people to come in with external ideas and technical knowledge into the team and bring it back.
I think this is also something that probably goes for every section of the business. I take the point of view at Carwyn, and we also have a fairly substantial production side of the business. I aim on being the dumbest person in the room when I sit down at a meeting at Carwyn. I don't pretend to know everything, and that's kind of always been my philosophy of there's always going to be someone smarter than you. You may as well try and get them to work for you, And I don't think it just matters in brewing, marketing, everything. Logistics is incredibly important. So, that's certainly how we work, and I know a lot more people are doing it that way.
Now, we've actually overrun time. Do I still have time to go up and down? I can't even see anyone. It was telling me to shut up, so maybe we're okay. Kate, can we run up and down the line and get a final thought? Oh, we're going till 1:30. I'm desperate for the loo. I guess any more questions? One thing we haven't talked about is sources of funding for the business in terms of, I guess, not necessarily how you've funded starting a brewery, but the various options that are out there, and maybe the pros and cons of each. There've been some people gone down the equity crowdfunding route, for example. Other people out there try and get in with as little money as they can from friends and family. Does anyone want to sort of talk about what the sort of different options are for people trying to source the funding to get off the ground?
I can give you our experience, and yeah, we very much went down the friends and family, and we were really lucky that we managed to sit down in front of, talking about network before, we sat down in front of the head of G Capital for Asia Pac, and he was looking at our finances, and we were still sort of umming and ahhing about whether or not we should be pulling the trigger and going for it. And he just laid it out real simply. The amount of money that you're planning on borrowing, you can service that with a job. So if this all goes to shit, you just go out and get a job and pay off your debt. Just go and do it. So yeah, I mean, borrowing from friends and family when you're on a very, very tight budget is perfectly possible. But if you want to go bigger, talk to one of these guys.
So we.
You going? Not me. I think everyone said it here today. It's about having a plan as well, like getting a really solid plan and idea of what you want to do, and getting it all down on paper and then costing it all out and working out exactly how much you need for one, because that'll determine potentially the type of people you might get involved. And it'll also help you so much in getting through your first early months in the business, because you'll have a structured environment to be able to know how much cash you've got coming in, how many bills you've got to pay, and all the rest of it. So I just recommend really getting that plan together, and then once you do that, that'll determine potentially the types of people that you might, or types of institutions you might go to.
We started off, despite what it looks like, with very little capital. Very little compared to the size that we came into the market. So we spent zero money on marketing, zero money on all the other whistles and bang. We just focused on putting the best equipment that we could. My advice, if you're raising money, is raise money from people that you're going to be partnered with for a long time. The worst thing that you can do is have a disgruntled shareholder who makes your life a miserable hell. And be aware that whatever you think you need in capital, probably triple it. And then be aware that there's going to be 50 million things that go wrong, and if your partners don't understand that they've gone wrong, and they're investing in a person who will be able to turn it around, right? And we keep talking about finding the right brewer. The right brewer is very important. The right financial person, the CFO behind the company, or the person doing your bookkeeping, is by far more important than the fucking brewer. Because ultimately, if you get audited and something's wrong, you're up shit creek without a pedal. And managing that, not just being audited, but projecting your cash flow. Build a projection every year. Even if you're alone in the company, build a plan for the next 12 months and measure yourself month by month where you are on that plan. Because it keeps you coming back and being focused. Oh shit, I hired someone I shouldn't have. Or do I need this thing? No, I don't.
Turns out it was scheduled 1 o'clock finish, but we'll still go up and down the line. I guess the one key piece of advice, or maybe the one thing you wished you'd known when you were getting started in the industry. John, should we start with you? If you have one piece of advice for someone getting into brewing.
Getting into the industry, well, first of all, it is the best industry in the world, hands down. It's filled with amazing people that, I was going to say, there's a secret resource, and it is the people in the industry. No one in my whole life has ever not given information to someone looking to start a brewery. So grab these guys, have a chat to them, and learn from the people that have forged the path before you. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, listen to people before you, but they're not the biblical truth. I'll tell you exactly what I think. It doesn't mean it's right. Figure out your own thing and adopt whatever you want to take from it.
Sorry?
My advice would be, just to work on who you are, know who you are and stick to it. And have a plan, always plan, and have fun doing it. Like, I'm sure you're going to hear it from every single person here. This is a great industry because it's such a community. You can see Ford and Holden getting along, or Coke and Pepsi, where we very happily support our competitors. So,
Except
yeah.
you guys. See you being like, fuck 'em.
But it's a great industry. So, make the most of being a part of it.
Rich?
Yeah, look, just echo the thoughts of everyone here. Really, exactly the same. I mean, you go to work and you put smiles on people's faces every day with what you do. So it's pretty easy to have fun, I reckon, and that's it's great to be involved.
Jessie?
Brand foundations. I know, boring. Make sure you do them at the start, and not just do them and then forget about them. Make sure you stick to them and work them into your plan as part of your everyday, day-to-day workings.
Fail forward. So be happy with failing and just learn from it. Keep moving forward. Keep being comfortable with your failures as much as your successes.
Reminds me, Andy Weatherall, the great DJ and producer, had 2 tats on his forearms. Fail we may, sail we must.
I think it's probably a bit the same as everyone else. Plan. The other thing is look outside to the rest of the beverage industry. There's lots of synergies and bits and pieces you can do with Mazen's making whiskey, and don't be afraid to put beer down the drain if it's not good enough. If you taste it and you go, just get rid of it. Don't put it in the market, because you can ruin a brand in one beer.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone. That's been an hour and 40 minutes. I think we've covered a lot of topics and a lot of great insight. This will be available online how soon? Next week via the IBA website. And yes, if you want to check into this again, thanks for coming along. Enjoy the rest of Good Beer Week. It's almost over, but it's been fantastic. Thanks to IBA, to Malt, everyone here. Thank you everyone. It's been great. Cheers.